Is emulation illegal? So the other day I saw this post where someone proudly proclaimed that emulation is illegal and that anyone who emulates should be in prison. Now I've actually seen this same image at least a couple times before. This post in particular might have been bait, who knows? However, I've seen this exact post so many times that I know that someone, likely the person who originally made it, actually believes this without the slightest hint of irony. So let's tackle the issue of whether emulation is illegal, as well as downloading ROMs, and what I think about this whole thing. So is emulation illegal? No. Like, it isn't even close. This isn't some sort of legal gray area thing. Sony v. Connectix was the court case, at least here in the US, the best country on earth, that said, in short, yes, emulators are legal. In fact, not only did they say that emulators were legal, but that they encouraged competition. Sure, Nintendo might try to tell you that emulating their games ever is illegal, but unfortunately for them, court precedent disagrees. Some people argue that it's okay, but you can't include the BIOS for the system, so you have to dump the BIOS from an official system, and definitely not download it from online. And that's sort of fair, but it depends on what counts as BIOS for the system. In Sega v Accolade, one of the issues there was that seemingly the only way for a Genesis game to boot was if the string to display, produced by or under license from Sega Enterprises Limited, existed in the code. If not, the game wouldn't boot. Therefore, it could be argued that if the only way to properly reverse engineer the system would be to, for example, copy small sections of the original BIOS, or that a known private key must be present in the code, that it's reasonable to include this portion. Oh yeah, speaking of reverse engineering, that's what emulator developers do. I'm sure some people think that emulators must just spawn from the ether by stealing code from the original console, but that isn't how it works. So in case I haven't made it abundantly clear, emulation is legal. You can emulate, I can emulate, and I could create an emulator if I want to, etc. I still don't get why the myth of emulation is illegal is a thing, except for, again, Nintendo. Hey, I've got a question for those who say emulation is illegal. If that were really true, why would Nintendo, the company known for attacking nearly anything that they could possibly send a cease and desist to, have not bothered doing anything for years at this point to the supposedly illegal and infringing program? Maybe it's because even they know they can't. But wait, Dolphin just got a cease and desist. No, they didn't. That was Valve. Valve got something from Nintendo where Nintendo asked them to not list Dolphin on Steam. That was not a cease and desist or a DMCA towards Dolphin. Valve complied simply because they didn't want to fight Nintendo over this. Now I will say one thing. I think a lot of people who don't know any better get emulation confused with ROM downloading, since depending on who you are, the two could be seen as sort of going together. And let's get into this topic, but let's make a distinction here. Is ripping of ROMs illegal? As in, taking your own game that you own and making a copy of it? No. Ripping ROMs is entirely legal. However, let's face it, a lot of people can't be bothered with it, and I think in some cases rightfully so. Mind you, some emulators for disc-based consoles especially allow you to just insert a disc into your optical drive. Assuming you still have one of those. But for many cartridge-based consoles, this can be a hassle to do. That's not to say there are no ways to do it, clearly there are, but at a certain point it's easier to just find it online. Now then, is it illegal to download ROMs of games? Well, that varies actually. I know this is a silly technicality, but I'd just like to add this. If you were to say it's illegal to download ROMs no matter what, wouldn't all official digital storefronts for these companies also be illegal? Okay, that technicality aside, let's talk about the actual thing here. Yes, technically, downloading ROMs is illegal. In the way 99% of people are talking about downloading ROMs. Yes, even if you own your own copy of the game, if you download it from online instead of ripping it yourself, that is technically illegal. However, this whole topic gets more into the practicality side of things. Let's start with this. Is it practical to rip the ROM yourself? As mentioned prior, in some cases, yes. And frankly, I think you should if you have the ability to do so. Again, in a practical sense. Next, how old is the game? Is the game from a decade or two ago? And more importantly, is it still being sold by the original developers? Because if the game isn't being sold by the original developers anymore, honestly, I don't see why you shouldn't just download the ROM. Because the big deal with piracy is the argument that piracy is theft and results in lost sales for the company that made the product. Whether you believe that or not is iffy. Most people now say that anyone who's pirating your product wasn't going to be an actual customer to begin with. However, if the company isn't even selling the product, or in some cases doesn't even exist anymore, who's losing out here? The person demanding way too much for some retro games on eBay? Yeah, they're probably going to be able to sell that to someone regardless. So yeah, if the game hasn't been sold in years and the company is no longer making it, I'd say go right ahead. Oh wait, sorry, that's right, companies like Nintendo, again, will cry about it if you do. Because remember Nintendo's motto, please remember, no play, only remember.
Don't you have a Switch eShop? Yep. So you could make your legacy content available there at any time. Yep. I'd like to purchase those games on the eShop with my money, without resorting to piracy, which you so thoroughly despise. So you should make them available for Switch. That makes sense to me. Then do it. We currently have no plans to offer classic content in other ways and also don't pirate our games.
Will a game company kick your door in for pirating ROMs from ages ago? No. Why? Well, does anyone remember Napster and LimeWire? Well, back during those days, record companies were suing anybody and everybody that downloaded songs that they owned on there. Sure, this was technically within their right. However, it caused an absolutely enormous amount of very negative press when the news showed a giant multi-billion-dollar record company suing teenagers for millions of dollars when their only crime was downloading their songs off of the internet. It's even worse for game companies, since at least with the previous example, it could be argued that many of those songs were still being sold on CDs. But with this example, yes, Your Honor, the defense downloaded a copy of a game that we haven't sold since 2007, nor do they have any way of legally purchasing from us. We request $3.8 million in compensation, as well as the blood of their firstborn child. Now, if the game is new or still currently being sold, I'd say that you should buy the game properly. It's one thing to download a ROM of a game from years or even decades prior, it's another to download the latest release from a few weeks ago. Finally, however, I want to add one caveat that I don't hear very many people talk about, specifically aimed at, who would have guessed, Nintendo. Some would argue that technically there are retro games being sold on the Nintendo Switch Online service. However, I'm going to argue that you should still download those too. Why? Well, this more has to do with the subscription service model. Sure, you get access to tons of games, until of course you stop paying, or until the service gets shut down. After which, those games are gone. At that point, you're not even purchasing the games, you're just renting them. For some, I'm sure that won't matter, but that personally bothers me. I mean, I already worry about games dying and being taken away despite my purchase, but here you don't even have that assurance. You stop paying, and hey, no more games for you. Oh yeah, also there's the fact that with emulation you can do so much more compared to the original hardware. You can change the aspect ratio, change parts of the game, play ROM hacks, improve the visual fidelity, adjust the controls, use fan translations for games that didn't get a translation or got bad official ones, play local multiplayer games online with friends through NetPlay, and, okay, frankly I think most of the time emulation is just flat out better. To end off, I'll give you a simple example. I used to be one of those people that wanted to get the best visual quality out of old games, and play everything on official hardware, and I wanted to make sure I had physical copies of every single game. But the more I tried to delve into it, the more I realized this would be a very expensive venture for what was essentially the novelty of playing on original hardware, while I could do so much more in emulation for little investment on my part. But hey, I guess I'm just missing out on the experience of paying north of $100 for a game from 20 years ago, right? Or I'm missing out on modding my console to output HDMI instead of composite. So, yeah, I think I've made my point now. Emulation rules. Thank y'all for watching, and take care. Nintendo, what the fuck are you talking about?